pleading justification. That is to say, since they admit that the article by Mr.
Glynn, my lord.
Glynn that appeared in the
The Evening Courier, my lord.
Since they admit that the article is defamatory but claim that what it says is true, they will call their evidence first. This is because the onus rests on the defense to prove on the balance of probabilities that the article and its implications are true in their entirety.
You are Derek Edward Glynn, journalist of 15 Marlborough Villas, Southeast 20.
I am.
How old are you, Mr. Glynn?
33.
Now, you're a journalist on the Evening Courier. How long have you been with that newspaper?
12 years.
What was your first job for them?
Film critic.
Your first job at the age of 21?
Yes.
That's very young to hold such an important position, isn't it?
Yes.
What was your next move, Mr. Glynn?
I was theatre critic for a few years, and now I have an arts page, so-called.
How many stories or interviews would you say you do in your arts page each week, on average?
4, I'd say.
And how long have you been doing them?
Almost 5 years.
So you've done what, about 1,000 such stories?
I hadn't dared add it up. Yes, about that, actually.
Now, has any of the 1,000 or so interviews you've done with these understandably touchy, sensitive people ever led to your being sued for libel?
Not until now.
No. Returning to the present case, Mr. Glynn, what made you choose this particular subject?
Well, my editor thought that Sarah Lee's comeback might be of interest to our readers.
Was it your intention to interview Miss Lee herself?
Oh, no, everyone was doing Sarah Lee interviews. I thought I'd try something different. I thought I'd go and speak to the author, Ben Haggerty. After all, it was his first play in London. And
how did the interview go?
It never really got started. I could see from the outset that Mr. Haggerty was very wound up, very upset. I later discovered he'd just heard that Miss Drake had been sacked.
Oh, yes, Patricia Drake being...
Yes, she played Miss Lee's daughter in the piece, the juvenile. I can't remember the character's name.
Now, did Mr. Haggerty tell you what he believed to be the events leading up to Miss Drake's dismissal?
Well...
Would you please just answer yes or no?
Yes.
Yeah. So you went ahead and wrote the story that appeared in the Evening Courier on May the 2nd, 1972, and which is the subject of this case.
Yeah, I can't remember the date, but yes, that's right.
My lord, if I may, I should like at this stage to read the article in full. It is an agreed document, my lord, and members of the jury have copies available to them. You will see, members of the jury, that it is headed Boobed Again. And it begins... Sarah Lee's comeback vehicle, the arrestingly titled Boobs by Ben Haggerty, that has followed Idem Eardem into the Princess
Idem Eardem?
It's Latin, my lord.
I'm aware that it's Latin, Mr. Ingrams.
Yes, my lord, I understand it's the title of a play.
Thank you.
That has followed Idem Eardem into the Princess Theatre, Shaftesbury Avenue, has run into problems only days after opening. Miss Lee's return to the London stage after an absence of 12 years has met with a somewhat lukewarm reception from the critics. While they reserved their cruelest shafts for the play itself, one cannot imagine that Miss Lee was overjoyed to read that she, quote, struggles gamely, unquote, or that she, quote, manages somehow to keep her head above water, unquote. However, the critics both in Edinburgh, where the play opened, and in the West End, waxed eloquent over one performance, that of juvenile lead Miss Patricia Drake, who plays Miss Lee's daughter. Now, readers of this paper will recall that your theatre critic hailed her as a genuine comic discovery. Sadly, however, Miss Drake and Boobs have now parted company. On Thursday of last week, when Cy Johns, the impresario responsible for the production, was in the audience, Miss Lee apparently decided that her performance needed some drastic alteration. Suddenly confronted on stage with a totally different character, who might have wandered in from the theatre next door, Miss Drake, who only left drama school 6 months ago, floundered hopelessly. At one point, the show almost ground to a halt when Miss Lee broke into a silent and solitary waltz, oblivious of Miss Drake, who stood with egg, as they say, all over her face.
Egg all over her face, Mr. Ingrams?
Theatrical jargon, my lord. I understand it means to find oneself at a loss, and thereby to look foolish.
Thank you.
Lord. Exit Miss Drake, and enter Miss Rowena Chapman, who replaces her. May I wish her better luck than her predecessor, and advise her in all sincerity, wear your drabbest clothes, and don't play the part too well. That is all, my lord. And now, Mr. Glynn, although you don't say so in so many words, the implication of all this is crystal clear, is it not? You are suggesting that Miss Lee deliberately engineered Miss Drake's dismissal because she feared she was stealing the show from her.
That's right, yes.
Now, in writing this article, did you rely entirely on what Mr. Haggerty told you, or did you have knowledge of your own?
Oh, I see. Sorry. No, I was in the audience that particular Thursday night. I thought I'd better go and see the play before interviewing Mr. Haggerty, and at first I couldn't understand what I saw. I'd read all the notices, of course, saying how good Miss Drake was in the part, and it was quite extraordinary. It was almost as if she was ill or hadn't rehearsed or something. She was all over the place. It was extraordinary. I couldn't understand it, that is, until I spoke to Mr. Haggerty the next day. He more or less confirmed my worst suspicions. I didn't see why people ought to get away with behavior like that. I mean, as I've said before, actors are very vulnerable. Their union isn't strong. They're easily exploited. If they fight, they get a reputation for being difficult. So I thought I'd better do something for myself. Besides, it was an act of such unbelievable callousness. I got extremely angry.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Glynn.
Is it true that your appointment as film critic straight out of university caused quite a stir at the time?
I believe it did, yes.
You became known for a while as the new Kenneth Tynan, isn't that right?
Excuse me, yes, I believe I was what is known as a young meteor, yes.
Mr. Glynn, were you aware that a story of this kind risked a possible libel action?
Yes, I thought it was possible. I didn't think it was very likely.
Why?
Because I do believe that what I wrote is the truth.
But you knew there was a risk?
Yes.
Yes. Now, did the prospect of the publicity you are getting from this case encourage you to take this risk?
Certainly not.
Why did you stop being a film critic?
Because I think that serious criticism has an important function to fulfill, and I'm not prepared to compromise on it. Showbiz gossip is different. Besides, one has to live.
Mr. Glynn, do you feel, how shall I put it, that your career is in any way gone downhill?
I earn more money now, if that's what you mean.
Not exactly. I was wondering if you
Lord,
feel
I
at all
really do
bitter
fail
that
to
you-
see the relevance of this.
No, what does it matter? Anyway, it's not important. I still do serious criticism. For a magazine called The Green, which is an excellent publication whose readership, as far as I know, consists mainly of the people who write for it. No one accuses me of being too esoteric there.
Yes, you reviewed Mr. Haggerty's play Boobs for The Green, didn't you?
I believe I touched on it, yes.
Touched on it? Well, I quote, Miss Lee has chosen as a vehicle for her comeback a play which, though updated, does its best to drag the theatre kicking and screaming back to the 1950s. More throwback than comeback. She plays a middle-aged divorcee in a trouser suit who has undergone a sudden and heady conversion to woman's lib. Determined to introduce her eccentrically wholesome 18-year-old daughter Eve, originally played by Patricia Drake, now Rowena Chapman, to the joys of female emancipation, she is trying desperately to persuade her to go on the pill and take a lover or two, or three or four. Eve's apparent disinterest at first stupefies her proselytizing mother, until in a moment of divine inspiration, she leaps to the astonishing conclusion that her daughter must be a lesbian. Confronted with a dyke in the family, her trendy addiction to woman's lib in the emancipated 70s takes a headlong dive out of the window, and she reverts magically to being a panicky suburban housewife. In the final reel, she is abandoned by her black power lover, who is whisked away by the now enthusiastically liberated daughter for a long and wet weekend in, where else, Paris. In 2 short hours, Mr. Haggerty takes woman's lib, lesbianism, black power, and that old standby, the generation gap, and manages to reduce it all to coach party snigger fodder. Well, you are Mr. Derek Glynn, whose name is attached to this?
I admit paternity.
You also, I think, early in your career, reviewed Miss Lee's last film before she went into retirement, The Sweet Hello.
Yes, and as I'm sure you're going to point out, I didn't like that either, and for much the same reasons.
Would it be fair to say that you have never liked her work?
No, it's more a question of the films and plays she's chosen to be associated with. To my mind, they represent an era and, for want of a better word, style that I'm anxious we should not return to.
Forgive me, my lord, but I really am unable to see the relevance of this.
I've given you every latitude, Mr. Golding. Could you explain where you're leading us?
Certainly, my lord. I wish to demonstrate to the jury that Mr. Glynn is and has been for many years prejudiced against Miss Lee's work. His artistic tastes are, by his own admission, for the esoteric, the contemporary, the highbrow. Now, Miss Lee represents a more popular, less intellectual form of entertainment. And because of his distaste for this, he lost 2 jobs, first as film and then as theatre critic. Under the circumstances, one can understand that he does not look too kindly on her, and it is our contention that this has led him to a hasty or deliberately false interpretation of the events, which was extremely damaging to my client. Now, this is, of course, all material to the subject of damaging.
Yes. Very well.
Yes. I am obliged, my lord. Finally, Mr. Glynn, when you wrote this article, had you met Miss Drake?
Yes. Yes, I'd interviewed her for my column. I'd done profiles on 3 young actresses just out of drama school, their aspirations, what they hoped to achieve, and so on. She was one of them.
You only met professionally?
No, I took her out to dinner subsequently.
Just the once?
Twice, I think.
Twice?
Yes, but just to dinner, that's all.
You and Miss Drake got on well together?
Yes, we got on famously together, but not well enough to jump into bed together, if that's what you mean.
Is that so, Mr. Glynn? I see.
Mr. Haggerty, would you please tell the court how old you are?
44. No, 45. Oh dear, that's a good start. It's not that I'm vain. Well, I am, but it's not that. I've just had a birthday and I haven't caught up with myself. 45. I am sorry.
That's quite all right, Mr. Haggerty. Now, I hope you won't think it impertinent if I ask you to tell the court a little about your career. Some members of the jury may not be regular theatre-goers and may perhaps not know your work.
Oh, good gracious, nobody's heard of me. Why should they? Even famous authors nobody's heard of, if you know what I mean. What can I tell you?
Well, how long have you been earning your living as a writer?
Well, I couldn't begin to. I have a little antique shop in Streatham. You can't live on what they pay you for radio.
Ah, so you write mainly for radio?
That's all I've ever written for. Except boobs, of course. Afternoon theatre, play half hours, playlets I call them, adaptations, bits and pieces. The usual stuff, you know. It's a bit of a rut, I suppose, but I don't take myself too seriously, and you can be sure it's going to be done, and it's good for a laugh, isn't it? You must stop me if I'm talking too much. I'm terrible like that, especially when I'm nervous.
That's right, Mr. Haggerty. Now, was this your first contact with live theatre?
Oh, no. I've always been stage-struck, balmy about it, ever since I was a little boy in knickerbockers. Well, I didn't actually wear knickerbockers, if you know what I mean. What did you ask me?
Was this play, Boobs, your first contact with the live theatre?
Well, it was the first play I had written for the stage, apart from a horrendous romantic verse drama I wrote when I was in the army doing my national service as a private and utterly miserable. But you can't count that, can you? But like I said, I've always been stage-struck. I have always had lots of friends in the theatre, and I go and see practically every show within reach of London. So in that sense, you could say it isn't the first contact with live theatre. No.
No. But it was the first play you've had produced?
Yes. Indeed, it was the first play I had produced, except, of course, for that horrendous... no, I didn't have that one produced, but it was the first play I'd written for the stage, except that verse... yes, it was the first play, yes.
Now, did you have any difficulty finding a management to put the play on?
Well, to be honest, yes. Mind you, you expect that, don't you? But I thought I'd have a go. I knew it was a good idea. All right, it's not serious enough for that magazine, The Green, or whatever it's called, but I just like to entertain people, not bore them to death. I mean, I believe in entertainment, not boredom. I'm glad that common sense triumphs over mess and anarchy in my play. Besides, I think that Paris is a lovely place to go to for a weekend. I'm sorry, but you see, I'd never heard it before. That review, as he says, who reads Greensleeves, or whatever it's called? It came as a shock, having it read out in court like that and having no chance to answer back. I do hope you understand.
Yes, we do understand, Mr. Haggerty, but the court's time is valuable. I must ask you to stick to what is relevant to the case.
Yes, my lord.
Mr. Haggerty, you were pleased that Sarah Lee was going to do your play?
Of course, yes.
Mr. Haggerty, I was under the impression that theatrical productions are notoriously difficult ventures, fraught with temperament and rows.
I think that's only too true, but this went like a dream.
Did you attend rehearsals of the play?
Every single one. I know writers aren't usually welcome, but I wanted to be there, and they didn't seem to mind.
What about Miss Lee?
The perfect lady gave me dinner in her hotel before rehearsals began. Never played the big star. Very kind, very human.
Did she and Miss Drake appear to get on well together?
Like sisters, always lunching together, going shopping.
Miss Lee seemed happy.
Yes, not effervescent, if you know what I mean, but perhaps that's not in her nature. A little bit private, perhaps. And anyway, her husband having died not so long before, and making her come back in the play, the responsibility, all the reporters, and feeling that everyone was waiting for her to fail. I wouldn't have wanted to be in her shoes, so she wasn't, effervescent, but she seemed very friendly and very happy. I'm sorry, am I saying what you want me to hear?
Oh, yes, indeed, Mr. Haggerty. Please carry on. I think it's important that the court should have in their minds a very clear idea of the background to the whole event.
Certainly. Well, she always seemed very cheerful and friendly, but after they came out, I didn't see her quite so much after that. In fact, I didn't see her at all, except on stage.
Were any of the notices kind about her?
Oh, they weren't unkind, only by omission, if you understand. They simply made Eleanor, that is Patricia now, the star of the show.
Rightly, in your opinion?
Oh, dear, what an awful question. Look, I have no illusions about this play. It's fair to middling commercial craftsmanship. I'd like to think it had a bit of heart, but that's another matter. The point is, the performances held it together. As directed, it worked. I'm not saying anything against Miss Lee. The audiences came to see her, and they adored her. But Patricia, well, she could have been born for her part. But it wasn't just the notices, you see. For instance, at curtain call, Patricia would come on second to last, and the applause would hit the roof. Then Miss Lee would come on, and instead of building even more, it dropped just that little bit. Now, she must have noticed this, must have. But as I say, she was very good about it, very good. Never any sign of tension.
After you'd done your 2-week tryout in Edinburgh, did you transfer straight away to the Princess Theatre?
Yes, there were a week of previews there first. Yes.
And after the first night there, did you continue to see every performance?
You couldn't have kept me away. Besides, Bernie, the director, had to go to Hamburg to direct a play in German, if you please, so I thought I'd better keep an eye on things.
Yes, so that if any of the actors had changed their performances at all, by this time you would have noticed.
Like a shot, yes.
And did they?
Well, bits and pieces, you know. But they kept to the framework, or rather they did until that evening.
Yes, now you're referring to the evening of Thursday, April the 27th, aren't you? The week before Mr. Glynn wrote his article.
Yes, yes.
Would you tell us what happened on that occasion, please?
Well, it was incredible. It was like watching another play. Sarah seemed to change everything except her clothes. Her timing, inflections, attitudes, moves, even. For instance, Patricia at one point was speaking her lines when Sarah came over, took her in her arms, gave her a great big hug. Well, she had never done that before. It threw Patricia completely. It was awful. She tried, she was inaudible, fluffed, stammered. At one point, I thought she was going to break down and cry. I couldn't bear it. So I was meant to have supper with Cy Johns and Miss Lee after the show, but I said no and went off home.
Yes, now, Mr. Haggerty, would you please just answer this question, yes or no? Was it the very next morning that you learned of the decision to replace Miss Drake?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Haggerty. Would you remain in the witness box, please?
Have you known Miss Drake long?
Yes.
How long, Mr. Haggerty?
All her life.
Are you related then?
Not exactly.
And what do you mean?
She is my goddaughter.
I see. Well, I'm sure we can all understand how upsetting it must have been for you to see your goddaughter looking foolish, Mr. Haggerty. Would you tell the court if you reach your own conclusion as to why Miss Lee behaved as she did?
I lay awake most of that night. I could only think of the obvious one, the obvious reason. But it seemed so unlike her. However, when Sir Johns rang up the following morning and told me he'd recast Patricia, then, well, I realized exactly what she had been up to. Unbelievable still, but quite crystal clear.
You say it's unbelievable, Mr. Haggerty. Then why are you so prepared to jump so readily to the conclusion that Miss Lee should behave in a manner which, according to your own evidence, is so wildly out of character?
I wouldn't say it's jumping to conclusions. I mean, look at the facts.
Oh, yes, indeed. Let's look at the facts. Now, you say that Miss Lee changed everything except her clothes.
Yes.
Did she actually say any new lines?
I don't remember her changing any words exactly. But as I said, timing, inflections, moods, all that.
On every line?
Well, no, not every line, but quite a lot.
I see. Well, not quite the same as saying she changed everything except her clothes. Still, as I've said, you were understandably upset at seeing your goddaughter making such a mess of things.
Come to think of it, she did change her clothes. She wore a different scarf in the first act.
You have also testified that the audience applause dropped whenever Miss Lee came on to take her bow at the final curtain. Well, now, did it drop dramatically? Was there a sudden silence?
No, it just dropped a bit. Fractionally, you know.
Did you have an instrument for measuring the volume of sound?
Of course not.
Of course not, no. And the truth is that it never happened. But you thought it did. You imagined that the applause was greater for your goddaughter, Mr. Haggerty, because that is what you wanted to happen. Like all your evidence, it is irretrievably coloured by prejudice. Not that you disliked Miss Lee personally, but the fact is you had never liked her performance. And what is more, you thought she should never have been cast in your play in the first place. Isn't that so?
Join us tomorrow in the Crown Court when the case of Lee versus Glynn is resumed. Lee's comeback play opened in London. A new young actress called Patricia Drake stole the notices. Shortly afterwards, she was fired. Arts columnist Derek Dynn wrote an article implying that Miss Lee deliberately engineered Miss Drake's dismissal because she was jealous. He alleges she radically changed her performance one night with the intention of making Miss Drake look foolish in front of their producer. Miss Lee has sued for libel. Author of this play, Ben Haggerty, is being cross-examined by plaintiff's counsel.
Were you aware of any differences of opinion during the rehearsal period between Miss Lee and the director, Mr. Friedman?
Not really.
Did they not differ in their approaches to the character?
Only, well, Bernie was anxious that Miss Lee should play her characterization of Lizzie as tough as possible, to beware of being too soft or whimsical, to be more aggressive, to go for the comedy.
Did you notice any reluctance on Miss Lee's part to interpret her character more aggressively?
She seemed a little nervous of it, perhaps.
On that Thursday night, you observed certain changes in Miss Lee's performance.
Yes, indeed.
In what way did these changes affect her characterization?
At the time, I was too appalled to think. Looking back, I'd say it weakened it, definitely.
Made it softer, more gentle?
I would say so. Lost a lot of laughs.
Did she stick to this gentle interpretation for the rest of the run of the play?
More or less, I think. I didn't see it very often after that.
Did it never occur to you that Miss Lee had always wanted to play the part more gently, less aggressively, and that all she was doing on that Thursday evening was putting this new interpretation into practice?
But surely, in that case...
I asked if it had ever occurred to you, Mr. Haggerty. I would be obliged if you would just answer that question.
No, it has never occurred to me.
You immediately assumed that Miss Lee had acted maliciously. Now, that is what I would call jumping to conclusions. Would you tell us if you felt that this gentler interpretation was wrong?
I felt it sentimentalized it. And for a women's lib harridan, that was fatal.
I take it you'd seen Miss Lee's work before she went into retirement.
Many times.
Would you agree that aggressive parts were not really her forte?
They are not what she is best loved for, certainly.
So you admit that she was not ideal casting for your play?
It was a great honor, of course, and I was flattered that she should want to do it. And she was a great star and deserved to be. So I mean no disrespect.
Mr. Haggerty.
No, not ideal.
No. So it's true that right from the word go, you felt she wasn't really doing justice to your play.
Not entirely.
And what about your goddaughter, Miss Drake? Were you pleased when she was cast?
Yes.
Was she your suggestion?
Yes.
Did you actually write the part for her?
Yes.
Thank you. Well, we cannot have much doubt where your prejudices lie in this case, Mr. Haggerty. I have no further questions, my lord.
Mr. Haggerty, when my learned friend put to you his theory that Miss Lee's motives for changing her performance were professional and innocent rather than personal and malicious, you began to say something. What was it?
Well, it doesn't make sense.
In what way?
Well, I mean, if she had been burning to play the part differently, I mean, we would have known. Well, one of us would have done, surely. And anyway, she should have called a rehearsal to warn everybody. I'm not an actor, but I know that it is standard professional practice. You don't just change your performance. It's a golden rule. You don't change it and spring it on a cast unannounced, especially when the management's in front.
Thank you, Mr. Haggerty. Does your lordship have any questions?
No, thank you. You may leave the witness box, Mr. Haggerty.
I call Eleanor Braithwaite, my lord.
What is your religion?
Catholic, I suppose, yes.
Take the testament in your right hand and read aloud the words on this card.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
You are Eleanor Braithwaite of 19 Hopetown Court, Fulham.
Yes.
However, in your professional capacity as an actress, you are known as Patricia Drake. Is that correct?
Yes. I'm known as Patricia in my every capacity now, well, almost, except by my family. Eleanor sounds odd.
With your lordship's permission, I think it'll simplify matters greatly if we continue to refer to Miss Braithwaite as Miss Drake.
I think
You
we're
follow
all
me?
agreed to whom we're referring, Mr. Ingrams.
Thank you, my lord. Why did you change your name, Miss Drake?
Equity, that's our union, made me. There's another actress called Eleanor Braithwaite, apparently. Not that I've ever met her. And I've always hated the name Eleanor anyway.
Patricia Drake has been a particularly lucky name for you, has it not?
Yes, I'm happy with it.
What I mean is that in a comparatively short career, you've done, I would have thought, extremely well. I mean, how long is it since you left drama school?
2.5 years, roughly.
But already you're very well known to millions of television viewers who have watched and no doubt enjoyed your present series, All the Nice Girls. Now, not every actress, I take it, could hope to star in a television series so early in her career.
Well, I'm not exactly a household name, but it was a lucky break.
However, at the time you began rehearsals for Mr. Haggerty's play, you were in a quite different position, were you not? I mean, neither well-known nor experienced.
As green as they come.
Would you mind telling the court what your experience had been at that point?
Well, I left drama school in June 71 and almost immediately had a small part in a lunchtime production in some basement. I didn't have any lines. I just had to remove a few clothes. It was a serious play and I didn't mind. Then I was on The Dole. Well, I didn't qualify for The Dole because I was out of work. Then I spent an interminable season sweeping the stage at Llandudno, which was experience of a kind, I suppose. And then in March, I think it was, I had 2 days filming in a TV classic series, in which I had to say, "Good morning, Sir Robert." That's it.
Until you were cast as Eve in your godfather's play.
That's right. Good old nepotism.
Did Mr. Haggerty, in fact, suggest you for the part?
Yes, of course. But I had to audition for it.
You got on well with Miss Lee?
Fantastic. As soon as I realised she was as jittery as I was, we just clicked. Or at least I thought we had.
So your relationship during the rehearsal period was good?
Yes.
Did it change after the play had opened and the notices had appeared?
I don't think so. As Benji said, we saw less of her. I gathered she hadn't been sleeping well and was under some sort of strain. I mean, that's pretty understandable, making a comeback at her age. I don't mean that. I mean any age. Although, of course, you can't make a comeback at 20, can you? Start again. What I mean is, what with all that and her husband dying and so on, it can't have been easy for her.
So your relationship did not change?
No. Well, for the first few performances, she used to come to my dressing room in the interval. We'd have a cup of tea and a giggle about all the things that went wrong in the first act. But she stopped doing that after the first week, I remember. I can't think of anything else.
Well, the first few notices would have come out by then, would they not?
I suppose so.
Did you ever talk to Miss Lee about them?
Gosh, no. To be quite honest, I was a bit embarrassed and she never brought them up.
Or about the laughs that you were getting, or the general feeling that you were stealing the show?
No, no.
Did you have the impression that you got more applause than she did at the end of the show?
Well, it's hard to be definite. I think perhaps on the whole I did. But I didn't have a noisometer thing.
No. After your West End first night, when you completed all the cutting and rewriting, had the performances more or less settled down?
More or less.
Did Miss Drake do anything, I beg your pardon, did Miss Lee do anything unexpected at this time?
She changed bits and pieces. Delivered a line out of the window once, I remember, and held my hand suddenly, which is something she hadn't done before, but nothing that really threw me.
If you were able to cope with that, what was so different about the Thursday evening's performance when Mr. Johns was in the audience?
Different? Goodness. Everything. It wasn't just a question of bits and pieces. It went on and on.
Well, can you give us some examples?
Well, her first entrance in the play. She was supposed to come in and tear me off a strip. She always used to barge in and slam the door behind her and give it to me good and strong from behind the door. All of a sudden, she comes in quiet as a mouse, silently creeps across to me, takes me by the arm, sits me down, and then very sadly gives me a gentle rebuke. All right, I lived with that. It made me corpse more than anything.
Corpse.
Laugh. Laugh, sir, when you shouldn't.
I understand.
Well, the more it went on, the worse it got. I was so astonished I couldn't think. Then it became terrifying. It's really very hard to describe.
Yes, but please try, Miss Drake.
Well, you know the famous nightmare that most actors and actresses have about finding themselves on stage in a play they haven't read, let alone rehearsed. There's the audience. And there's you. And the words are flying round and round the stage. And you're supposed to do something, say something. And there's nothing. You don't know what it is. You can't speak, you can't move, and everybody's waiting for you. Well, it felt just like that. I was so frightened, you know, waiting to see what she'd do next. I just made noises and hoped for the best. I know it's hard for somebody who isn't an actor or actress to understand just how terrible it was. But you see, it was obvious it was deliberate. It had to be. And that made it worse.
Why had to be?
Because she only did it with me.
Mr. Haggerty has testified that at one point she suddenly embraced you. Now, do you recall that?
Yes, right in the middle of one of my lines and dried me stone dead.
Miss Drake
Dried, you see.
forgot her lines.
How did the second act go?
As far as I can remember, it wasn't so bad. She didn't change so much. But I'd had it by then. As soon as the show was over, I just wanted to be out of the theatre on my own. I was gone before the audience were out. Yes, I know it sounds hysterical, but as I said, I was a beginner.
You feel you could handle such a situation better now?
Ah, yes. I don't know how exactly. It isn't easy, even for somebody with Miss Lee's experience. But she taught me a lot. I feel I could cope with it now.
Would you tell us what happened the following day?
Nothing much. My agent rang me. Gave me the good news.
What were your feelings?
Nothing, really. I'm a bit like that sometimes. I just cut off for a while.
Did Mr. Glynn also ring that day?
Yes.
Did you speak with him?
No.
Why not? You knew him, didn't you?
Yes, sure. We'd had dinner, like he said, but I didn't want to see anybody. Benji rang as well. I didn't want to see him either. I'm grateful to Derek Glynn. We all should be. Actors and actresses take far too much and never dare answer back. But when it happened, I'm afraid I just wanted to bury myself under the blanket and keep the world out. There are times when even an actress doesn't want publicity.
Have you had any contact with Miss Lee since that time?
Oh, about 2 months afterwards, she sent me a letter, which was a note, really. It said, "Dear Patricia, I'm so sorry. Sarah."
Did you reply?
No, I burned it.
What is your reaction to the theory that the motives for Miss Lee changing her performance were purely professional and artistic.
My reaction is, I don't believe it.
Miss Drake, is it true to say that most directors hammer away at one or two particular points in somebody's performance during rehearsal, trying to make them be this or do that?
They most certainly do.
Yes. Can you tell us what, generally speaking, your director, Mr. Friedman, was trying to get from you?
To be tidier, greater technical precision.
Why do you think that was?
Because by nature I'm an untidy actress, or at least I was. I happen to believe that spontaneity is more important than technique.
I see. Can you recall what his chief preoccupation was with Miss Lee?
To be tougher, more extrovert. More brassy was his word, I think.
Was that because her instinct was to play the part more gently?
Perhaps.
Yes. So you might, in all fairness, have been aware of this.
She didn't exactly fight for it, you know. She didn't make much noise.
Well, you have testified that she was very jittery, is the word you used. Might that have been why she didn't fight louder or make her feelings more public?
Maybe.
Yes. Is it true that, having been away from the business for so long, she was always a little uncertain about professional custom and etiquette?
I suppose so. At least she always used to pretend she was as much of a beginner as I was. We used to joke about it.
From your experience, would you agree that she was always very vague about what was or was not standard professional conduct?
Yes, she seemed to be.
Like whether or not she should call a rehearsal before modifying her performance?
Ah, no, I'm sorry. You can't forget a thing like that.
Not even when you've been out of the business for 12 years. But you say that in general you enjoyed working with Miss Lee.
Very much.
Did you enjoy the whole rehearsal period, Miss Drake? Did you enjoy the final week just before you opened in Edinburgh?
No.
Why was that?
I got one of my depressions.
Please speak up, Miss Drake. The court must hear what it is you have to say.
I got one of my depressions. I get them periodically, and I got one then.
Would you tell us about them?
There's nothing much to tell. I got one of my depressions. You want me to describe them or something?
Briefly, if you would.
Oh, boy. Look, I get depressed sometimes, don't you? Okay, I go to a shrink, and he tells me I'm quite normal.
Now, when you're suffering from one of these depressions, would you say that you're pleasant to be with?
Not at all.
So if Miss Lee had wanted to enlist your cooperation in something, like, for example, adjusting to a different kind of performance, you might not have been amenable.
I suppose not.
No. You said that you were convinced that Miss Lee's actions were a deliberate assault on you because she only changed her performance vis-à-vis you.
That's right.
Did you not have scenes together with other people?
Yes.
And did Miss Lee make any changes in them?
I suppose so, yes.
So it could have been affecting other members of the cast.
No, it was aimed at me, I assure you. And she knows it.
Yes, I have no further questions, my lord.
No re-examination, my lord.
You may leave the witness box, Miss Drake.
That concludes the case of the defendants, my lord.
Very well. We're ready to begin, Mr. Golding?
Certainly, my lord. I call my client Mrs. Sarah Bertou.
Take the testament in your right hand and read aloud the words on this card.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
You are Mrs. Sarah Bertou, actress, professionally known as Sarah Lee of 12 Turnham Mews, Southwest 15.
I am.
My lord, once again, I think it would simplify matters if you would permit me to address Mrs. Bertou by her professional name of Sarah Lee.
I'm sure that is the name by which we would all most readily recognize her.
Indeed, my lord. Now, let's simplify the issue. Miss Lee, you have been publicly accused of changing your performance specifically in order to destroy that of a fellow actress, thereby engineering her dismissal. Now, such an accusation is self-evidently extremely damaging to someone in your position. Now, first of all, do you admit that you changed your performance on that Thursday evening, May the 27th?
Yes, to a certain extent.
And did this affect or damage Miss Drake's performance?
Yes, I'm afraid it must have done.
Very well. Now, the crucial issue, however, is one of motive. Did you change your performance in order to damage Miss Drake? Was that your deliberate intention?
No, of course not.
And did you feel that her success in the part posed a threat to you?
Certainly not.
What made you choose this play, Boobs, for your comeback?
Yes, I'm not very mad about the title either. Well, I felt I was right for the part. And in spite of what Mr. Glynn has said, I think it treated a sensitive subject or rather subjects, with sympathy. Above all, I think I thought that it was up to date without being too difficult or obscure. It was a very difficult decision, because coming back after 12 years away, I did feel like a complete beginner.
Only with the responsibilities of a staff.
Well, yes, exactly.
Did you feel the rehearsals went well?
Well, everyone was very kind and helpful, but I couldn't help feeling nervous that we were losing the reality of the play, making it all too strident, playing too much for comedy.
You wanted to play the part more gently.
Well, it seemed to me more real. But the director said that I was over-sentimentalizing it, and I thought, well, he's young and confident, and I'm just a middle-aged old bag who doesn't know what's happening anymore, so I kept quiet.
Were there any other problems?
Well, it was all part of the same thing, really. I mean, it wasn't a problem. Well, I suppose it was, but... Well, you see, Patricia was delightful in the part, but... Well, on her own admission, she is inexperienced. Now, Bernie was always trying to get me to dominate all my scenes with her to compensate for her inexperience. And, well, I did find that a strain.
Could you perhaps give us an example of what you mean?
Well, for instance, my first entrance, which Patricia has accused me of changing. Well, I was always being told that the play needed an explosion at that point, something to lift the scene along. Well, somehow I just couldn't get that right in my mind. I mean, here was a woman who was worried about her daughter. I mean, she wasn't angry, she was worried. And that was the only way I could see it. But I did try to play it the other way. I tried very hard. Somehow the aggression never seemed to work, not between mother and daughter.
And did you say anything about this to Miss Drake or to the director?
Well, as I say, I was trying very hard to trust Bernie's direction and judgment. So I kept quiet for the first 3 weeks. But then I decided that I had to do something about it, and I braced myself to say something, and I went into the theatre, and I found Patricia in this terrible depression. Well, it went on practically until we opened in Edinburgh, and I just felt I couldn't add to her problems.
Indeed. And would it be true to say, in fact, that you did everything you could to see her through it?
Well, she was in the most terrible state, poor girl. I mean, I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. I was the only other woman in the cast.
Now, did you say anything about wanting to change your interpretation after you'd opened in Edinburgh?
No, because we went straight into doing cuts and rewrites, and that went on until we opened in London. Well, I felt that perhaps the changes might make a difference and that I ought to give them a chance. Anyway, there really wasn't time to think until after we'd opened in London. Then the pressure eased a bit, and, well, the more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that I should play the part differently, play it my way. I just felt it would be better for me and for the show and for everybody. Well, all the others were making little changes. And
all the others were making little changes?
Yes, so I thought, well, why shouldn't I? So I tried a couple of things one night, and they seemed to work, so I decided to go ahead.
You felt you had a legitimate right to exercise your proper artistic control to play the part the way you wanted.
I couldn't have put it better.
Now, were you aware that Miss Drake was having trouble on that Thursday night?
Well, I know it's going to be very hard to make anybody understand this, but, well, no, not really. I mean, I did notice that she'd fluffed rather badly a couple
fluff?
Oh, I'm sorry, my lord. It means to muddle up your words or stammer or...
I understand.
And I did notice that she was rather slow at times, but... Well, honestly, I was concentrating so hard on what I was trying to do that I just had to keep going. I'm afraid I'm not one of those actresses who can be sufficiently detached to notice exactly how other people are performing.
Well, Miss Drake has testified that all your changes were specifically aimed at her.
Yes, I know, and it's nonsense. It really is. It's just that so many of my scenes were with her. And it was the mother-daughter relationship that I was so worried about, that I felt was unsympathetic.
Yes. Now, Mr. Glynn described you as launching into an impromptu and solitary waltz. Is that true?
Yes. Yes, that's in the second act, when Lizzie is... Oh, I'm sorry, that was the character I was playing. And she's had her women's lib ideals rather rudely shattered, and... Well, she starts talking to her daughter about the joys of romance and crinolines and Johann Strauss, and I don't know, it just seemed right at the time.
So you deny that your changes were aimed specifically at Miss Drake?
Well, of course I do. I'm afraid quite selfishly I was just thinking of myself. I'm sure I made changes in my scenes with other people. But in any case, it wasn't. I was so unaware of what was happening to Patricia that it wasn't until Mr. Johns came round to my dressing room afterwards that I realised she'd been so at sea.
Yes. Now, did you and Mr. Johns have dinner after the show, as I think had been planned?
No, I was feeling too tired. We just had a drink in my room.
Miss Lee, would you please tell the jury, did you ask Mr. Johns to sack Patricia Drake?
No, certainly not. It's unthinkable.
Now, what did you talk about?
Well, he said that Patricia had been all to pieces that night and that he was afraid that he'd gambled with her and lost.
And what did you say to him?
I said, how else could she get experience except by doing it? I said I thought she had a great future.
Having tried this gentler, less aggressive interpretation, did you continue with it for the rest of the run of the play?
Yes. Against my director's advice, I know.
Do you regret it?
Well, it was the only way I felt I could play the part. Oh, but I do regret what's happened, certainly. I mean, Patricia being sacked and terrible things being written about me in the papers and having to come to court. Yes, of course I regretted it. It's been a nightmare.
Join us tomorrow in the Crown Court for the final day of Lee versus Glynn. Case at Crown Court, the actress Sarah Lee is suing journalist Derek Glynn. Mr. Glynn implied in an article that she changed her performance one night in such a way as to make her inexperienced juvenile lead, Patricia Drake, look totally incompetent. Furthermore, it was on a night when the producer was in the audience, with the result that the following day Miss Drake was sacked. Miss Lee's motives alleged Mr. Glynn were professional jealousy. Miss Lee denies this and insists that she had changed her performance simply in order to improve it. Defence counsel has begun his cross-examination.
Would it be fair to say, Miss Lee, that your marriage, which ended so tragically, was what many people would regard as old-fashioned, in the sense that you were content to rely entirely on your husband, to leave all decision-making to him?
Well, I lived his life. I'm not ashamed of it.
No, of course not. I'm simply trying to understand what it must have been like for you to suddenly find yourself faced with the necessity of making your own decisions. Decision to go back into the theatre, for example.
Well, I couldn't sit around doing nothing, and as it turned out, I needed the money. I'm afraid we'd always lived rather well, and...
Yes, of course. You've told us how insecure you felt, that you felt like a complete beginner, and I'm sure we all sympathise. Particularly in this situation, to fail as a star making a comeback must be unthinkable.
Well, the press built it up, so I couldn't help that.
Yes, and of course you were vulnerable in other ways as well, weren't you? You felt out of touch with contemporary theatre, and you had lost the one person you most needed to rely on.
Yes, look, must we go on about this, please?
I'm afraid we must, Miss Lee, and I'm sorry to be so blunt, but the point is that at a time when you so desperately needed to succeed, at a time when the pressure on you to do so must have been daunting, you failed. Not a spectacular failure, no, that perhaps would have been more bearable. A niggling failure. You failed not because you were necessarily bad, but because someone else was so good. In short, you were a star being outshone, Miss Lee. I suggest it would have been inhuman for you not to have felt some jealousy.
No, that's not true. I have told you I felt no jealousy.
Is it true, Miss Lee, that one of the newspaper quotations displayed outside the theatre read, "Miss Lee provides a charming counterpoint to Miss Drake's dazzling comic genius"?
Well, I'm not sure if it was outside the theatre, but it does ring a bell, yes.
Well, didn't you find that galling?
No, why should I?
Well, to be reduced to a charming counterpoint.
I assure you, I don't think like that. I'm just delighted if somebody thinks I'm charming.
Are you sure you're being entirely honest with yourself?
Yes, I am. You are not going to make me say that I wanted Patricia out of the show. All I wanted was the freedom to play my own part as well as I could, that's all.
Did you find your director easy to talk to?
Yes.
And Miss Drake?
Yes, usually.
Well, Miss Lee, you'd been working together for nearly 8 weeks. Surely you could have discussed with them the changes you proposed to make.
No, you don't understand. You see, most of the time I wasn't even sure in my own mind that I was right. And then I was nervous of asserting myself. I know it sounds pathetic, but it happens to be true, so I just dithered and said nothing. Then when I decided to say something, I found Patricia in this terrible depression, and then we opened in Edinburgh and then in London. Look, I have explained all this.
Yes, Miss Lee, but what you have not explained is why you did not call a special rehearsal to warn not simply Miss Drake, but the entire cast that you intended to change your performance.
But if
Something that we've been told is standard professional practice in the theatre.
When I was a drama student 25 years ago, I was always taught to call older actors and actresses Mr. or Miss, and smoking in the theatre was simply not allowed. Well, now I find that even the most junior ASM call me Sarah, and actors can't even handle their props for the cigarettes they're smoking. Now, I'm not criticising, really I'm not. I'm just trying to point out that standard professional practice has changed. I mean, after 12 years, I had no means of knowing what rules applied and what didn't. Besides, don't you think that I would have liked a rehearsal for myself? But it would have meant calling everybody into the theatre on their first day off in weeks. On the Wednesday, I had to give an interview, and on the Thursday, there was a matinee.
Well, why didn't you wait until the next day? Call a rehearsal and then make the changes in your performance on the Friday instead of the Thursday.
Well, if I'd thought a rehearsal was so important, I would have done.
I suggest it was because you knew Mr. Johns was going to be in the audience on the Thursday.
Yes, in a way it was. I wanted to be at my best for him. Is that so wrong of me?
I suggest it was because you wanted Mr. Johns to see Miss Drake at her worst.
No.
Then why didn't you call a special rehearsal to warn her, Miss Lee? You see, I find this totally impossible to understand. I mean, if you'd just gone to her dressing room, left a message, anything.
Yes, I agree, I should have done. I can see that now, but at the time I couldn't. Because I was muddled and stupid and ignorant, not because I was evil. I just saw no harm in it. That is the simple truth.
No harm in suddenly giving a totally new performance to a young girl, vulnerable young actress, suddenly just out of drama school?
Firstly, it was not a totally new performance. It was a change of interpretation. And secondly...
Yes?
Well, I just didn't think that Patricia was quite so vulnerable as perhaps this court has been led to believe.
I'm not quite sure I understand you, Miss Lee. Are you suggesting that Miss Drake plays the ingenue off stage as well as on?
What I meant was that in her own way, I thought she was quite mature. In any case, I had no intention of making life difficult for Patricia. On the contrary, I was sacrificing my performance to her inexperience.
It must have been a very painful sacrifice, Miss Lee.
No, I didn't mean that.
Indeed, a sacrifice that you were no longer prepared to make. What about this waltz we've heard that you suddenly launched into with Miss Drake? Did you keep that in your performance subsequently?
No, it just didn't work.
So the only time you did it was on that evening?
Yes.
What about this decision of yours to suddenly hug Miss Drake in the middle of one of her lines? Did you retain that?
No. I did it at the end of the line.
You say you didn't ask Mr. Johns to dismiss Miss Drake.
I did not.
But Mr. Johns did express concern about her performance, didn't he? Did you explain the reason for it?
Well, I said that I thought she had a great future.
Did you, Miss Lee, specifically tell him that you had changed your performance that evening and that perhaps was the reason why she had looked so bad?
No, I didn't, because I hadn't even made the connection in my own mind at that point. I mean, well, there was no reason for bringing it up. The question of Patricia being sacked was never mentioned.
I suggest to you, Miss Lee, that as a result of the particular stress that you were living under at that time, you were driven to an act of such cruelty and such callousness that you cannot face admitting it to yourself even now.
I have told you the truth over and over again. Look, you can accuse me of stupidity, of thoughtlessness, of being unprofessional, but you cannot accuse me of being deliberately, maliciously evil. Look, it is your job not to believe me. I do understand that.
No further questions, my lord.
No re-examination, my lord.
You may return to your seat, Miss Lee. Thank you.
I call Mr. Cy Johns.
What is your religion?
None, I will affirm.
Please read aloud the words on this card.
I do solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
You are Cyrus Arthur Johns of 41 Solent Drive, Epping.
That's right.
Now, Mr. Johns, I know you have to get to a meeting, so we'll let you go as soon as possible. But first of all, did Sarah Lee ask you to recast Patricia Drake?
Certainly not.
The decision was entirely yours.
I always make my own decisions.
Why did you do it?
Look, it wasn't just because Patricia was a mess the night I saw the show. She's got natural talent. I know that, and that's why I gave her first break, and I'm proud of it. But it had become obvious that she and Sarah could no longer work together. Now, I'm not blaming either of them. Sometimes it just happens. But given that situation, there was only one choice I could make in the interests of the play. Without Sarah, the show would fold. Patricia had to go. Simple as that.
So Miss Lee did not suggest or even hint that she should be dismissed?
Well, certainly not. And I wouldn't have taken too kindly to it if she had.
Did you tell her of your decision?
No.
Why not?
She was a lady with a lot of worries. Now, as producer, it seemed to me that it was my job to take problems off her shoulders and not add to them. So I decided to present her with a fait accompli. It was entirely my decision, taken in the interests of the play, and I did not discuss it with Miss Lee.
Mr. Johns, did you pay Miss Drake compensation?
Oh, yes, we did. After negotiation, it was agreed that we should pay her 4 weeks' wages.
How much was that?
£140.
And how much did she receive?
£210.
And where did the extra 2 weeks' wages come from?
Miss Lee. At her own request and quite unknown to Miss Drake. I would just like to add that in my experience such behaviour is typical of one of the true ladies of the English theatre.
Thank you, Mr. Johns.
Mr. Johns, did Miss Lee telephone you on the Sunday to explain to you that the reason that Miss Drake's performance had been so bad the night you saw it was that she had changed her own performance radically and without warning?
Well, not in so many words. She telephoned me to say that she was very upset that the show had not gone well the night that I saw it, and that perhaps it had been her fault.
Has it never occurred to you, Mr. Johns, that you have been the victim of a subtle plot by Sarah Lee? Without actually putting anything into words, she cleverly manipulated you into sacking Patricia Drake because she saw that she was stealing the show from her? That you were, in fact, hoodwinked, Mr. Johns?
Oh, people don't hoodwink me, I assure you. Well, I dare say there are actresses, yes, of course, I know there are, who are capable of staging something like that. But not Miss Lee, not in a million years.
How many times had you seen the play in public performance before that one?
Well, I'd only just that day come back from 3 weeks in New York. I had seen the first dress rehearsal, of course. And my business manager had been looking after the show in my absence.
You're telling us that this was the first time you'd seen the play in public performance?
Yes, that's true.
Therefore, Mr. Johns, you could have had no idea at all how drastically Miss Lee had changed her performance, could you?
No, that's right.
How long have you been an impresario, Mr. Johns?
9 years.
And as an experienced producer, you summed up the situation very clearly, didn't you? Recognized exactly what Miss Lee wanted you to do and went along with it.
I deny that Miss Lee wanted me to do anything of the kind.
Mr. Johns, I have here some newspaper cuttings of some 18 months ago in which your name is linked with that of Miss Lee. Romantically, I think is the phrase. Is there any truth in them?
None. That was just gossip column nonsense. Our relationship has always been purely professional.
Purely professional, Mr. Johns?
Yes.
You are Muriel Esme Collins of 41 Martingale Drive, Edgware.
I am.
Now, would you tell us how long you've known Miss Lee, Miss Collins?
19 years.
Have you worked with her often?
Whenever she does a play, she asks for me to be her understudy. When she makes a film, I'm her stand-in.
Yes. Now, during the Edinburgh tryout of Boobs, did you and she stay at the same hotel?
We did.
So if there was anybody whom she would tell her private thoughts and feelings to at that time, it would have been you?
Yes.
Yes. Now, Miss Collins, perhaps you could tell us, first of all, was she jealous of Miss Drake's success in that production?
She doesn't think like that. The thought would never enter her head. She's too generous, too trusting, and too much of a fool. Of course, I've told her this many times, so there's no embarrassment.
You detected no hint of animosity towards Miss Drake?
None whatsoever. Of course, she had her worries. She was worried about her performance, as she's told the court.
Did she talk to you about it?
No, she doesn't talk much about herself. That's part of her trouble. Doesn't do in this business. But I knew, of course. I'd watched rehearsals, I'd taken her through her lines, so I knew what she wanted. But she never really said anything until after we'd opened at the Princess.
Now, would you tell the court what happened then?
Well, she was staying at my place. Her own flat was being done up. We were coming back from the theatre after the show on Wednesday night. And she said she was very worried because she felt that she was being forced into giving a wrong performance.
What was your reaction?
I told her to go right ahead and play it the way she wanted. It made my blood boil to think how people were exploiting her good nature. I told her, you're a star. If you'd only behave like a star, people would treat you like a star.
Did she express any reservations, any concern?
Oh, well, she dithered a bit. She said, do you think it's all right? Can I go ahead just like that? I told her not to be silly. I'd take her through the script after the matinee next day, and then she could be at her best for Mr. Johns to see her.
Yes. Now, what was her reaction the following day when she learnt that Miss Drake had been sacked?
She was appalled. Predictably enough, she wanted to take all the blame on herself. She wanted to ring Mr. Johns and say that it'd all been a terrible misunderstanding and that it was her fault and so on.
Did you offer any advice?
I told her not to stick her neck out when she hadn't done anything wrong.
Which, in your opinion, she hadn't.
Look, if you're looking for a villain in this piece, it's me. Of course, I know you're not supposed to change your performance without warning everybody, but I was afraid that if she called a rehearsal, she'd get talked out of it. And God knows enough people do change their performances, especially stars. As for Patricia, I reckon she could look after herself. I'm sorry that things turned out the way they did, but to be honest, it upset me to see a kid fresh out of drama school being given her head, allowed to steal the laughs, while a star of Sarah's experience was being pushed under, all because she was too soft. This business is a jungle. I know, because I'm at the bottom of the heap. But she hasn't a clue. She's an innocent, and somebody had to protect her. So if you want to accuse anybody of being a deliberate schemer, accuse me, not Sarah Lee.
I see. Thank you, Miss Collins. Will you wait there?
Miss Collins, it's very noble of you to cast yourself in the role of villain in this way, but I can't help wondering if your loyalty is not a little misplaced. Would you say that you have a great deal of influence over Sarah Lee?
I have some, I believe.
Now, as I understand you, you felt that Miss Lee needed to take care of herself because Miss Drake posed a threat to her.
Miss Drake was playing for laughs and getting them.
Well, having such influence over Miss Lee, don't you think it's possible that she might have been, if only subconsciously, affected by your attitudes? That, in fact, the effect of your loyalty was not to reassure and support her, but rather to prey on her mind, to inflame her insecurities, her anxieties, her jealousies?
She doesn't think like that. Jealousy is not in her vocabulary.
Miss Collins, could anyone be so innocent?
Yes, Sarah Lee.
Are you really expecting us to believe that Miss Lee really did not know the effect of changing her performance would have on a vulnerable young actress?
You're making it all sound too simple. There are 1,000 other pressures on her. She doesn't think like that. She's told you, I've told you. It's the truth.
You further expect us to believe that Miss Lee did not know in her heart of hearts that she should have called a rehearsal to warn Miss Drake?
Well, blame me. I told her it didn't matter, and she trusted me.
Yes, perhaps that's why she asked you, Miss Collins, because she knew that you would provide the answer she wanted to hear. Perhaps you were being subtly used, Miss Collins. Perhaps, indeed, at this very moment you were being so used. Your loyalty to Miss Lee, your attempt to draw the fire onto yourself has been remarkable, but perhaps to Miss Lee it has been nothing but predictable.
That's absurd. It's a wicked lie. You have no understanding of her, none whatsoever.
No further questions, my lord.
My lord, I have no re-examination. Unless your lordship has any further questions, that concludes the evidence for my client. My lord, members of the jury, there is basically only one issue at stake. Now, nobody is denying that my client, Miss Lee, did in certain respects change her performance on that Thursday evening in London, though you may well feel that the extent to which she did so has been exaggerated. Now, nobody is denying that Miss Drake was sacked. The question is whether Miss Lee did the one in order to achieve the other. And you have to decide, in short, whether or not her motives were malicious, remembering that both Mr. Glynn and Mr. Haggerty had particular reasons for taking Miss Drake's side. Now, I ask you to bear in mind the fact that in a profession noted for its somewhat cruel gossip, Miss Lee has remained universally liked. Now, all witnesses on both sides has testified to that. And I would also ask you to remember that when she began rehearsals, she was in a particularly vulnerable situation. Instinctively feeling that she was being forced into giving the wrong performance, she nevertheless was nervous of asserting herself. And when she did pluck up the courage to do so, Miss Drake's depression prevented her from speaking. And growing daily more certain that she had to play the character her own way, she decided finally on action. And although she made mistakes that she bitterly regrets, her intentions were not malicious. She only wanted to do her best, and as she herself has said, she was so wrapped up in her anxieties that she failed to foresee the results. Now, according to the defense, you are asked to believe that she is the kind of woman who can manipulate or hoodwink an experienced producer, who can use her own oldest friend, Miss Collins, in a calculated bid to destroy a fellow actress. Can you honestly believe that the woman you have seen in the witness box is such a ruthless schemer? I put it to you that the idea is exactly what Mr. Haggerty called it, unbelievable. And I ask you, therefore, to find for the plaintiff.
Thank you, Mr. Golding. Mr. Ingrams?
May it please your lordships, members of the jury, I ask you to consider not whether Miss Lee could be such a schemer, but whether she could be such an innocent, indeed whether anybody could be. Now, I do not dispute that Miss Lee is a generous, unassuming, popular person. But it is my contention that however much it may seem out of her character, she had motives for behaving as she did exactly as stated in the article written by my client, Mr. Glynn. Remember, at the time of her attempted comeback, Miss Lee was desperately needing success, and she was failing. Now, my learned friend himself has referred to her vulnerability and her insecurity at this time. And under these circumstances, I suggest that it would be inhuman for Miss Lee not to have felt jealousy, fear, anxiety, aggression. Now, I suggest that Miss Lee acted instinctively, as does every human animal under the stress of fear. Suddenly she saw her chance, and perhaps without really considering, she took it. The director of the play, Mr. Friedman, against whose wishes she was going, was away in Germany. The impresario, Mr. Johns, was to see the show in public performance for the very first time that night. Miss Lee drew on Miss Collins' support to provide herself with a moral alibi, and she then skillfully manipulated Mr. Johns into carrying out her intention. Under the stress of fear, she took refuge in deceit to the point where she was able to disguise her motives even from herself. And those motives were to rid herself of a threat. Now, the alternative, that Miss Lee did not feel any jealousy, or that she didn't recognize and foresee the results of her actions, implies a naivety in her that is surely quite beyond belief. I submit to you that on the balance of probabilities, the statements made in the article written and published by the defendants state nothing but the truth. And I therefore ask you to find for the defendants. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ingrams. Members of the jury, learned counsel on both sides have presented you with a choice, which, when boiled down to its essentials, depends on your judgment and experience of human nature. I cannot help you there. My task is to advise you on the law, and it is simple enough. If the defense satisfy you on the balance of probability, if you think that Miss Lee acted deliberately with intent to damage Miss Drake, you must find for the defendant. On the other hand, if you find for the plaintiff, you must go on to consider the question of damages. Firstly, you must consider what sum is fair compensation for any injury to the plaintiff's reputation. Secondly, if you think that the defendant's motives in publishing the article were influenced by spite or ill will towards the plaintiff, you may enhance the damages given in compensation to reflect the plaintiff's injured feelings. Will you now retire and consider your verdict?
All stand. Members of the jury, will your foreman please stand? Please answer these questions yes or no. Have you decided upon the answers to the agreed questions which you have before you?
Yes.
On the first question, do you find that the allegations made by the defendant in the Evening Courier on Thursday, May the 2nd, 1972, were true?
No.
The second question, what damages do you award the plaintiff, Miss Lee?
£5.
My lord, I ask for judgment for the plaintiff with costs.
Yes, indeed. I agree that the defendant should pay the costs of this action.
Court will rise.
You can join another jury when our cameras return to watch a leading case in the Crown Court.